There are over 250 blocks in Terraria, and today I'm going to rank them all, twice. Greetings friends, Khaios here, Happy New Year. It's been a while, hasn't it? I know a lot of people have been curious about where I've been, but I don't want to take too much of your time with the details here, so I made a community post that you can read through if you're curious, that goes a bit more into detail. Regardless, I'm eager to jump straight back into content, so let's get into the video. Terraria is a wonderful sandbox game with a ton of building options, largely thanks to the massive number of blocks that we have to work with. One of the questions I get asked most often is, where are you? What is your favorite block? Now, while I could answer this with my own personal opinion, and I intend to, I began to wonder if I could also objectively rank all of the blocks in Terraria, so today I'm going to try and do both. We'll have an objective tier list, followed by my personal subjective tier at the end of the video. Just keep in mind that the current version of Terraria is 1.4.4, so when the next update drops, any new blocks or changes to the current blocks can make this list out of date. But before I get into ranking the blocks, we have to define exactly what a block is. Sure, things like dirt and stone are easy to identify, but what about platforms? Ropes? Teleporters. Is a teleporter a block? It can be sloped, it can be painted, even actuated. I personally don't think it is. So for this tier list, I want to give a set of specifications for what a block is. A good place to start is by figuring out what Relogic considers a block. They did, after all, create the game. So for the purpose of this tier list, an obtainable block must be found within the Blocks tab of the Journey Mode duplication menu. There will also be some unobtainable blocks that you can't hold in your inventory, but you can place, such as living wood. So I'm going to include those. In the Block tab, however, there are plenty of things that I personally would not consider blocks, such as beams, ropes, and sand castles. I feel all of these fit somewhere between blocks and furniture. The tab also contains walls, which I really do consider completely separate from a block as well. So after removing all of the walls, beams, ropes of all types, and sandcastles, I feel that everything else in the tab would be a block. So this is what we're going to be ranking today. Combining the obtainable blocks in the tab, plus a few unobtainable blocks, there are a total of 267 blocks on this tier list. The next challenge is going to be deciding how to try and rank them objectively. I created a point system for the blocks. A point is rewarded for the following features. If the block can be used to craft walls, if it can be used to craft other blocks, if it can be used to craft non-building items such as armor or weapons, if it can be used to craft furniture or other placeable items, if it can be used to create a biome, if it can be toggled with wiring, if it creates particles, if the block is animated, if the block glows or produces any light, and it will also gain a point for each special feature that didn't make this list. So as an example, let's take a look at Great. It doesn't craft walls, non-building items, or other blocks or furniture, nor does it create a biome, produce lights or particles, and it isn't animated. It can be toggled open and closed with wiring, however, which gives it 1 point. It also has two special features. In its default state, Great is a solid block to everything except for light and liquids, making it extremely useful when you need to drain a liquid from an area. When toggled into its off position, it won't allow liquid through. But the second special feature is that it won't allow light to pass through it in its off position. So those two special features each give a point, which means Great has a total of 3 points. For this tier list, any block with 0 points gets F, 1 to 2 points gives a D, 3 to 4 gives a C, 5 to 6 is a B. If a block has 7 or 8 points, it's an A, and anything above that gets S. That means Great Block is a C tier block in the objective tier list, though I will certainly be ranking it higher in my subjective list at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. But before we dive into ranking the rest of the 266 blocks, Videos like this take a lot of time and effort to research, plan, and produce. So if you like my content and you want to help ensure that I keep the channel going, please consider heading over to my Patreon or joining right here as a YouTube member, where you get access to my private Discord server as well as some various other rewards. Or if you're looking at purchasing merch from the official Terraria store, which has a ton of amazing options, be sure to use my affiliate link in the description below. And of course, as always, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to help boost the video with the YouTube overlords. Now let's dive into the tier list. Now, obviously, there are a lot of blocks to go through, so we're going to do this in chunks for the sake of time. Let's start with the worst of the worst, F tier. These blocks don't get a single point on my ranking system, which is kind of ironic because I personally love most of the blocks on this list. Both living wood and living mahogany find their way here. Yes, there is a living wood furniture set, but that is all crafted from plain wood blocks, as you cannot obtain the living block as a material. For that reason, they end up with 0 points. The same goes for bone block, as the walls and furniture are crafted from bones, not the block. All of the colors of team block also join F tier. Surprisingly, while there are platforms for each of the team blocks, you can only purchase them from the traveling merchant and you cannot craft them yourself. Coralstone block also finds its way into this tier along with sandstone slab. And lastly, while these are a couple of my personal favorite blocks to use in the game, red and blue dynasty shingles get the mark of shame for their lack of interesting features. And these are the unlucky 13 blocks that have been ranked F tier. Truly ironic that it is 13, that was definitely not intentional. Moving up a bracket to D tier, we are going to find the majority of blocks in this section. Most of these blocks are here for being able to craft a few items such as furniture or walls. I'm going to save time by not reading every single one of them off on the list, and instead focusing on the more interesting blocks in the tier that have special traits. If you'd like to see the full list of blocks and their rankings, I have a Google Sheet available for your reading pleasure. Just click the link down below. All of these D tier blocks are lacking special features. Yeah, there's quite a lot of them. For the more interesting D tier highlights, we have Jungle Grass block, which gets a point for being able to create a jungle biome, but it also has a special feature of being able to spread itself onto nearby mud. Grass block is here too for that same reason, as it spreads onto dirt along with ash grass that spreads onto ash. Green, brown, red, blue, and purple moss all get points for their ability to spread onto stone and gray brick as well. Slush block has 2 special features, as it is affected by gravity and it can be fed into the extractinator to obtain various different items, as you can do with desert fossil as well, which also ends up in D tier. Thin ice causes players to slide around when walking on it, but it also breaks when players jump on top of it, making it a very unique block, but just still barely blocking itself in the D tier. Frozen slime joins it because, like other ice blocks, it makes players slide on top of it. What makes it even more unique is that frozen slime is completely frictionless. Players will continue to slide on it at the same speed until they are no longer on top of the block, move in the other direction, jump, or they collide with something that stops their movement. It is the only block in the game that causes this frictionless interaction, yet sadly, its lack of crafting options still lands it in D tier. Rain and Snow Cloud also find their way into this tier because they both create particles and they both negate fall damage when landing on top of them, but unlike normal cloud blocks, these two do not have any crafting options. Asphalt makes players run faster. Echo blocks are invisible to players unless Spectre Goggles or Echo Chambers are in use. Anti-portal blocks are the only blocks immune to the portal gun. Spikes and wooden spikes both deal damage to players that come into contact with them, and they also cause the player to get the bleeding debuff. They aren't the only dangerous blocks in this tier, as Hive Block can spawn bees when destroyed. It also produces honey whenever you break it. But as you can't actually obtain the block as an item, and all of the crafting needed uses Hive, not Hive Block, we can't count any of the crafting recipes, and it doesn't get to rank any higher. Finally, to wrap D tier up, pink slime blocks cause the players to bounce when landing on top of them. We are already halfway through the blocks, and we're now moving on to C tier. This list is also quite long, so once again I'm going to go over just the highlights. All of these blocks are capable of scoring 3 to 4 points and landing in C tier, but nothing too interesting with them. Once again, the full block tier list is found in the link below if you want to read through it. For now, let's just look at the most interesting blocks in this section. First up is one of the oldest blocks in the game, Dirt. The Journey's End update and some of the following updates since have really elevated this block. It can now craft a wide variety of walls. It is used in a set of vanity armor, and it can even be crafted into mud block. Dirt block is also unique in that it can be moved around using the dirt rod, which can be particularly useful in adventure maps. Editor Khaios here. While I was building a demonstration for the next block on this tier, I learned something new that changes something from the previous tier. Hive Block apparently creates the jungle biome. This was news to me. That means Hive Block gains 1 additional point, bumping it up from D tier to C tier. Now, back to the ranking. Moving on, Honey Block is used in several crafting recipes, but more interestingly, it slows players' movements both horizontally and vertically. Another block in this tier that does something interesting when players touch it is Ethereum Brick. When a player is standing or walking on the brick, it produces shiny particles. Lizard bricks are not only hard to spell, they are one of the toughest blocks in the game. They cannot be destroyed with explosives. They also create the jungle biome and are used in various crafting recipes. Notably, these blocks are not necessary to spawn jungle temple enemies, as the walls are the most important feature in that instance. Similar to lizard bricks, blue, green, and pink bricks from the dungeon all end up in this tier as well. They are immune to explosives at all points in the game, and they are used to craft platforms as well as the next blocks in our list. Cracked green, cracked blue, and cracked pink bricks. These are very unique as well, as they have a chance to break when players run along them, jump onto them, or grapple into them. When they break, they drop a projectile that can damage entities below or trigger teal pressure plates. And most interestingly, cracked bricks are the only blocks in the game that can be broken with grenades. Usually the explosion from a grenade doesn't do any damage to blocks, but it does to these, which means cracked bricks have very interesting utility when used in adventure maps. There are some other interesting blocks in the tier, such as granite and marble, which don't create biomes per se, but they do spawn unique enemies. Cloud blocks, like the rainy and snowy versions, negate all fall damage, but the normal clouds end up a tier higher due to its use in crafting walls, as well as the rainy and snowy cloud blocks. And I'll conclude C tier with conveyor belts, which pushes items, NPCs, or players to either the left or right, depending on which way it's rotating. It can be toggled via wiring as well. It's a very handy block with an interesting animation. For the final 3 tiers, there are a lot fewer blocks, so we can talk about each one individually. Let's take a look at the B tier, starting with Ethereum Block. You may be wondering why Ethereum Block is in this tier, while Ethereum Brick was in the previous tier. While both blocks are used in various crafting recipes, and they both produce particles and light, Ethereum Block has an interaction that the brick doesn't. It acts similar to ice, causing players to slide around while walking on top of it, which is enough to elevate it 1 tier higher. Lava, krypton, xenon, argon, neon, and helium moss all have the capabilities that their D-tier cousins do, but these ones also have the advantage of producing a faint light. They can be crafted into fishing bobbers, and they can be used to create their respective glowing moss bricks, easily elevating them to B-tier. Next up, this tier has a lot of desert vibes in it, as sandstone, hardened crim sand, hardened ebon sand, and hardened pearl sand are all in here, along with normal sand and crim sand blocks. Numerous crafting recipes are available for all of these items. The non-hardened sands are affected by gravity, and the corrupt crimson and pearl versions all create biomes and spread those biomes to nearby blocks, giving them all enough points to land in this tier. Ebonstone block and pearlstone block also make this tier for similar reasons, just barely, because they produce particles. Unfortunately, crimstone didn't make the cut to B tier due to its lack of particles. Ice block is the next B tier entry, as it can be used to craft walls, other blocks, furniture, and it creates the snowy biome. It, like other icy blocks, allows players to slide when moving on top of it. Another interesting icy variation is up next, which you might not be expecting. The Ice Rod block. This is a tile that is created when you use the Ice Rod. It is completely unobtainable. I wasn't sure whether or not to even include it on this list, but it does meet all of my requirements for unobtainable blocks. It can be sloped with a hammer and placed in a single tile. You can even paint it. So I decided to add the block. Like other ice blocks, players slide on top of it, and the block also produces particles. It also has the ability to be placed midair without needing to be placed on a nearby block or wall, and of course, the most interesting feature is that it is a temporary block. It only sticks around for a few seconds before shattering. The next block is pretty fragile. Cobweb is used to craft a wide array of items, including blocks, walls, armor, some weapons, and more. It doesn't have collision per se, as players, NPCs, and items can pass through it, but it does slow players down on contact. Additionally, cobwebs break as players move through them, or when they are hit with a weapon or projectile. The final B tier block is a bit of a stinker, but honestly, I love this addition to the game. Poo is used in crafting walls as well as fertilizer, which is extremely handy. It causes players that walk on top of it to receive the stinky debuff, causing clouds of green gas to appear from them. And best of all, poo blocks create a very unique particle in the form of little flies that hover around the block. The A tier list is much smaller than the previous. There are only 3 blocks that secured the necessary points. The first 2 are ebon sand and pearl sand blocks. These are both very versatile blocks. Like all of the sand blocks in the previous tier, they are both used to create glass and magic sand droppers. They're also used to create 2 biomes, the desert and the corruption, or the hallow depending on which block you're using. And they allow players to run much faster when using Dune Rider boots. The thing that makes them stand apart from all of the other sand blocks in the previous tier is that they produce particles, and that final point was enough to elevate them to A tier blocks. The third and final block in this tier is Hellstone. It is used to craft a wide array of items. In addition to the crafting options, it creates particles with red sparks shooting from the block on occasion. Surprisingly, it doesn't produce light, however, but it does burn players that come into contact with it, and it spawns lava when you mine it in the underworld. Hellstone is immune to explosives in pre-hard mode, and that wraps up the A tier, but there is still 1 block left to cover that is actually pretty similar. The one and only S tier block on this list is quite a powerhouse. The top ranked block for this set of criteria is none other than Meteorite. Not only does it have a few crafting recipes, but it shoots out sparks and burns players similar to Hellstone. The big difference here is that Meteorite glows faintly, and unlike Hellstone, the sparks that are produced from this block do light the area below. Just like Hellstone, Meteorite cannot be destroyed with explosives until after you're in hard mode. While Meteorite does not produce a biome per se, it does allow meteor heads to spawn, as long as there's enough Meteorite on the screen. And on top of all of that, if your world has enough of these blocks in it, it prevents any further meteors from falling into the world, potentially damaging your precious builds. This block really is deserving of an S tier rank, in the objective sense. That was a lot to go over, and it covers my attempt at making an objective tier list, but I did say I would answer the age-old question of what my personal favorite blocks are. I don't want to eat up too much more of your time with another complete tier list, so let's just fill in all of the middle tiers, then give you the best and the worst. These are all of the middle tier blocks. Now, here are my completely biased picks for F tier and S tier blocks in Terraria. In the subjective F tier, we have blocks that I basically never build with because I think they're ugly and their utility is pretty low for me. I won't cover them all because it's fairly lengthy, but the worst of the worst is Rainbow Brick, as it's quite difficult to obtain, and frankly Helium Brick accomplishes what it does in a much more beautiful way. I also include Bubblegum Block and Pine Tree Block in this tier because for me, they're pretty ugly, and they have no utility. I rarely ever use them. And these are the rest of the F tier blocks in my personal opinion. Unlike the objective S tier, my subjective S tier has more than one block in it. I absolutely love Thin Ice, both in appearance as well as utility, as it is great for adventure maps. I just wish that it could also be destroyed with grenades, because I think that would greatly improve its functionality in those types of maps, like is the case with Cracked Bricks, which I also give S tier. I definitely place Great Block into this tier as well, because if you actuate it, it looks wonderful as a medieval window, and you can even close the shutters to block out light with wiring. Not to mention how useful it is to have a solid block that allows liquids to pass through. Conveyors make the list because they look really good for techie builds, but they also have a lot of function and utility as well, especially for farms and adventure maps. I love Hellstone Brick for its functionality, but it's also a phenomenal block for adding ambience to any build that needs some sparks added to the mix. Leaf Block and Mahogany Leaf Block also make the tier for their ability to produce atmospheric particles. The falling leaves can be seen even if the blocks are echo-coated, and those falling leaves even take on the color of paint that you use on the block itself. Extremely unique and useful. Next up is the Ice Rod Block. It's not great as a block in the ways that the others are, simply due to the fact that it is only around temporarily, but it is still an S tier block due to its utility. In fact, I would go as far as to say that this block is pretty much mandatory for building. Ice Rod Block is a lifesaver for building in the air. It also has a lot of utility in adventure maps. It's a fantastic block, even if it's quite different from everything else on this list. And after a lot of thought about what I would say is the best block in Terraria, I would unironically put Poo Block at the top of my highly opinionated S tier list. The block looks pretty decent as a mud substitute, and it blends with dirt even better than mud does. But much more than that, this block is best used with echo coating and actuators to give you the tiny little insects wherever you want them. That is an incredible detail to throw into a build to give it more life and character, and for that reason alone, the block makes the S tier. I only wish that there were more blocks in this game that produced small insects or even critters for us to use like this one does. And that wraps up both my objective and subjective block tier lists. Again, you can find the full lists linked below. Leave a comment of what you think about my attempt to rank them without a bias, or with a bias. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know down below. If you like this video and you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe to help the channel out. And if you're already subscribed, don't forget to leave a like. If you'd like to help support the channel, please check out my Patreon linked below. A huge thank you to my biggest supporter for the month. Sarcasm not intended. I really do appreciate you. And be sure to check out my channel artist, MythicalWater, linked in the description below. Thank you all very much for watching. Be back soon with a new video. Happy building.